In this video, I'm going to show you how to place a front lower control arm on this Lexus IS. This is located behind your front wheel, and you will need an alignment after this job is done. Let's get started. With the vehicle safely raised and supported, use a 21mm socket and remove all 5 lug nuts and then pull the wheel off. Just as a tip, if your vehicle has locking lug nuts and the special key for it, don't use an impact on it, break it free by hand with a breaker bar, then finish removing it because the teeth on those little sockets can break. And remove your wheel. On the control arm, you'll find the lower part of the sway bar link attached right here with a 17mm mounting nut. As you can see, there's an Allen head cutout on the end of the stud, which most likely we will need to use. So I'm going to try to clean all this up, the threads and that cutout, so we can actually insert a hex socket in there. And cleaning the threads with a wire brush is going to help since they're a little bit rusty. That way the nut can come off easier. A good tip for cleaning these cutouts is just grab a pick and try to pick all of the rust and debris out of there so you can actually get your socket properly seated so it can grab on. I'm going to hammer in a 6mm Allen socket. I took it back out because what I want to do is use a power tool on that mounting nut to try to at least break it free. Then I will switch over to some hand tools so we can unthread it. Use a 17mm socket and at least try to break it free. It's spinning, but as I expected, it's stuck. I'm going to add some rust penetrant to the threads. I'll use a 17mm ratcheting wrench on this. And I'll hammer in my Allen socket. And there we go. And there goes the mounting nut. Take that off. And there it is. With the help of a pry bar, if you pry the sway bar down, you should be able to allow tension to relieve off of the sway bar link, and you can pull it right out. Use a 10mm wrench or socket on both the bracket that holds this on the control arm. Take that off, now you can move it. Let's remove the cotter pin that is on the outer tie rod, and to do this you might need a pocket screwdriver to help you pry the hook out, slide it off, use a 17mm socket and remove that mounting nut. Oh, looks like for me the tie rod stud popped out, which is great actually. Sometimes they don't and they get stuck in here. Now because this is an aluminum knuckle, I would not want to hit it with a metal hammer. You could try to tap it with a rubber mallet or dead blow hammer right here. Most likely what you'll end up doing is having to use a tie rod stud or ball joint stud remover tool. What that looks like is it clamps on to this part of the knuckle, has a bolt that threads down, and it'll pop the tie rod out. Once again for me, well, this has already happened, so I'm going to remove it. Below the knuckle and the rotor, you'll see 2 19mm headed bolts that clamp the lower ball joint assembly onto the knuckle. Let's remove both of these. That knuckle separated, which is perfect. We can now move this to the side. Careful of your CV axle, the ABS wire and all that, but as long as you can move it to the side like this so we can access the top ball joint nut, that's it. That's all you need to do. Let's remove this cotter pin, same way as the tie rod one. Help it along with a pocket screwdriver. Now just so you know, these hook style original cotter pins you can reuse. If you happen to have one that you have to bend over anywhere on the vehicle, that one you have to replace, but these you can reuse if you want to. This is a 19mm nut. Remove it. Sometimes the ball joint separates at this point, but other times it doesn't. You have 2 options. One, you can use a rubber mallet and tap it from the top. You could even put the mounting nut back on it flush so you can avoid damaging the threads. Definitely, no matter what you do, do not use a steel hammer, or you could use a ball joint or tie rod stud separator tool, which is like a clamp with a bolt that goes through it and it'll pop it out through pressure. Before I try that special tool, I'm going to just try the rubber mallet method.
A lot of times that ends up working. Let's remove this 22mm mounting nut that holds the lower strut mounting point onto the control arm. Get this little washer off as well. I just want to make sure that this isn't completely seized in here, which does happen sometimes. So what I will do is reinstall the mounting nut until it's flush, and then just use a hammer to at least make sure that it will break free. Perfect. This is the forward bolt for the lower control arm that bolts it to the subframe. Now this right here is an alignment adjustment, so we have to not necessarily mark it because we'll never get it spot on, especially since you need an alignment after the new control arm is installed anyway, but I just want to make sure that I get it somewhat in the same position. And I'm noticing that this little hole here is exactly at 6 o'clock, so straight down. So when I put it back, I'm going to make sure that this cam bolt goes back exactly as it was. That way it'll get it as close as possible to a good alignment. But like I said, the alignment professional will adjust this after you are done with the job anyway. Put a 19mm socket on the mounting nut and remove it. Remove the cam washer from the other side. There it is. And now we have to push this bolt through. Spray some rust penetrant in here. Often what happens is these cam bolts, they seize inside the control arm. I'm going to put a breaker bar on my 22mm socket and just try to spin this. There we go. I want to make sure that it isn't seized in the bushing, and to be fair, it was almost seized because at first it didn't want to move without spinning the bushing. So now we can punch it out of here. I'm putting the mounting nut on so that I can hammer a little harder without worrying about destroying the threads. There we go. Use a punch and a hammer and drive this out the rest of the way. So this end of the bolt is actually hitting the subframe, and here's a trick around that. Now you can do this with a hand chisel. I'm going to use an air chisel because it's a lot faster, but what we want to do is separate these two. This washer is actually just pressed onto some splines here, so if we put a chisel in here, it'll separate the two. All right. All right, so that's out. Now the only note about doing this is because this isn't keyed, it's splined, it can fit in any way, but this is keyed. So you need to make sure that you line this up when you press it on exactly how it was before. And I remember, for me, this line was straight up and this hole was straight down. And if you look carefully, the pattern right there around the bolt head lines up. So when I put it back, I'm going to make sure that all of this is lined up straight with that pattern matching up. But that makes it so you can more easily take this out. On the back of the control arm, what we're dealing with is two large bolts that go up and through the subframe and bolt this on. And then I want to remove this bracket, even though I could probably slide this out. I would rather get this out of the way. So two 14mm bolts here, that will free everything up. This big bolt towards the front is a 22mm. And then we have a 17mm bolt right here. Slide the arm off of the lower strut mount. And there it is. Now take your new control arm and we'll slide it onto the strut, which is where we removed it from, the last point that we removed it from. And then I'm gonna curl it up like this. Try to have one of the bolts ready to start so that you can secure it, at least temporarily. I'm going to put a pole jack up here and lift everything up into position. That way the bolt hole lines up. I put some anti-seize on the non-threaded area of this bolt. I'm gonna leave this slightly loose so I can line it up on the back. Start these two bolts in. Let's get these snugged up for now. Okay, now back to this one. This holds the subframe in place and of course the control arm. So let's make sure this is nice and tight. I'll be back to torque it, but I have to remove this so I can get to the other bolt. This 22mm headed bolt gets torqued to 114 foot-pounds. All right, this 17mm headed bolt gets torqued to 63 foot-pounds. Now this mounting nut right here does not come torqued. We need to torque it when we are ready to torque the front bolt. So we'll leave this loose for now and we'll come back to it in a little bit. We'll torque these two to 37 foot-pounds. All right, now let's try to line up this forward bolt. All right, and as I mentioned earlier, I want to make sure that the bolt goes back just like it was, and that is perfectly positioned. So to make sure it stays like that, I'm going to hammer it in. Now on the other side, I'll install the washer, and then of course the mounting nut. Now on the lower strut mount, let's install this washer keyed towards the wheel side, and then of course the mounting nut. Now I'm not going to snug this. We have to torque this and the other bushings at right height, so I'm just gonna put it on by hand, get it close, and then we'll lift this whole control arm up. I have my pole jack set up ready to lift this up. If you're on the ground, of course, use your floor jack. I put a rubber pad in here just so I don't press on the aluminum control arm. You can put a piece of wood in there, whatever you have. And I'm just going to lift this up until it's about parallel with the ground. That is approximately right height on this vehicle. I'm going to stop right here. Let's torque all the fasteners that need to be torqued at right height. It doesn't matter where you start. I'm just going to start at the front here, torque this mounting nut to 88 foot-pounds. We're going to have to hold the bolt to make sure it doesn't spin, and actually it did move a little bit, so I'm going to have to bring it back just a tiny bit. I'm going to use a 22mm wrench for that. Okay, I got it slightly adjusted. Let's torque it 88 foot-pounds. All right, that's tight. Torque this mounting nut on the lower strut mounting point to 83 foot-pounds. And that leaves us with the rear bushing mounting nut. We'll torque this to 83 foot-pounds with a 24mm socket. Now we can release pressure off of our support. Reinstall the lower ball joint. When you put it on, you'll see two arrows on it. Those need to face towards the engine, not towards the wheel. Slide it in and put the mounting nut on. Bottom it out. Torque this mounting nut to 88 foot-pounds. Looks like the whole thing is spinning. So what I'm going to do is apply some pressure with my pole jack. That's going to make sure the stud stays stationary, and that'll allow me to tighten this a little bit better. You don't want to press too much, otherwise it'll damage the ball joint, but a little bit of pressure, it'll be okay. You actually need it sometimes in situations like this. All right, that's good right there. Now, my castle nut is slightly damaged to the point where the little teeth broke off of it. So at this point, it being torqued, I can't line up any slots and I can't even source a new mounting nut. So I'm going to leave it like this, and instead of putting in my factory cotter pin, I'm just going to put in one that bends over. If you still had a good mounting nut, you would continue to tighten until the next slot lines up in order to secure this castle nut properly. I'm going to release pressure now. I recommend coating this area of the ball joint with a little bit of anti-seize just so it doesn't corrode while it's mounted on the knuckle in the future. You don't need a lot, just a thin layer to coat it. If you put more than a thin layer, it's going to squish out after you mount it anyway, since this is pressed tight up against the knuckle. Bring the knuckle over and line it up with the ball joint. And you really want to make sure that these dowel pins go in the knuckle just like this. You're threading into aluminum, and a very slight difference in angle here can actually cause the bolts to cross thread in the knuckle, and you basically ruin the threads in the knuckle. So at this point this is lined up, let's thread in our bolts. Make sure they start smoothly by hand. Once you've started them both, snug them up. Torque both of these two to 92 foot-pounds. All right, that's torqued. It's time to bolt up our ride height level sensor. I put a little bit of anti-seize on there. This is aluminum and this bracket is steel, so if there's ever corrosion that happens, it'll happen pretty badly, so I wanted to prevent that. Also make sure that this little hook goes into its hole that is cut out for it. That is how you know that it is properly lined up, so it can take a proper reading of the ride height. Put this 10mm headed bolt back in and snug it up. That's bottomed out. A little bit extra is all you need. This is very small going into aluminum. It just needs to hold this bracket on. Let's reinstall the sway bar link on the lower control arm. Might need to pry down on the sway bar again. There we go. I put anti-seize on those threads just so I can make sure it doesn't corrode in the future. Get the mounting nut back on. I'm gonna put my wrench on here and my Allen, and we'll tighten it up. All right, that bottomed out. Gonna give it a little bit extra. We'll get the tool out and we'll torque it. Torque this to 62 foot-pounds. As I suspected, the entire stud is still spinning, so I can't really torque it. If you can, 62 foot-pounds. I'm gonna put my wrench back on with the Allen and give it another quick snug. That should be plenty tight. All right, okay, that is tightened up. Let's get the wheel back on. Start on all 5 lug nuts. We'll bottom them out in a cross pattern, and also in a cross pattern, we'll torque all of them to 76 foot-pounds. If your vehicle has the locking lug nuts with the key, be very, very careful with these. I don't recommend using a power tool on them. I'm going to use one just to slowly bottom it out, but I'm not going to impact through this adapter because the teeth on the backside can very easily break. Once again, 76 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. Double check them all. Remove your tool if you had one of these here. There you have it. Take it for a road test, and don't forget to get in alignment.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.